I was working the I was working the ticket counter at a train station in Germany when an American tourist walked up to me. There were 6 people in line ahead of him. He stood there for maybe 10 seconds, looked around, and then just walked straight past everyone to my window. Not pushing, not rude, just genuinely confused about why everyone else was standing in that formation. He asked me for a ticket to Munich. I pointed at the line. He looked back, saw the other people, and said, "Oh, are they all waiting for you too?" I nodded. He seemed shocked. Like the concept of a queue was a new discovery. He apologized and went to the back, but you could tell he was annoyed. Not at me, at the system itself. Like waiting in order was some strange European thing he had never encountered. Another time, I was at a bakery in Amsterdam. Small place, maybe 4 customers inside. Everyone waiting their turn. An American couple walked in, looked around, and went straight to the counter. The woman started asking about the pastries while someone else was mid-order. The baker just stared at her. She didn't get it. Her husband noticed people glaring and whispered something. She turned around, saw everyone waiting, and said, "Oh, sorry, I didn't see a line." There was no physical line. People were just standing near the wall, waiting. She genuinely thought you had to see a rope or a number system to know people were waiting. My friend worked at a museum in Paris. They had a ticket booth outside. Long line every morning. She told me about this guy who tried to skip ahead by asking workers random questions. He would walk up to the front, lean in, and say, "Hey, quick question. Where's the Mona Lisa?" They would point inside. He would nod, then try to just walk past like the question gave him a free pass. Security stopped him every time. He did this 3 times in one morning. Same question, same move, same result. On the 4th attempt, he finally joined the actual line and muttered, "This is so inefficient." I saw someone at an airport in London try to board a flight early by standing near the gate agent and inching forward every few seconds. The airline was boarding by groups. He was in Group 5. They called Group 1. He moved closer. Group 2. Closer. By Group 3, he was basically hovering over the agent's shoulder. She looked at him and said, "Sir, are you in Group 3? He looked at his ticket and said, "No, but I'm ready." She asked him to wait. He didn't leave, just stood there. When they finally called Group 5, he acted like he had been waiting patiently the whole time. These are not isolated incidents. This happens constantly. And it is not because Americans are rude. It is because the idea of waiting without clear instructions feels wrong to them. If there is no sign, no rope, no number, they assume it is free for all. And when they realize there was an invisible system the whole time, they get frustrated. Not embarrassed. Frustrated. Like everyone else is playing a game they were never taught. I was a hotel receptionist in Vienna. An American family checked in and asked where breakfast was. I told them it starts at 7 in the morning. The father asked if they could come at 6:30. I said no, 7 is when it opens. He looked confused and said, "But we have an early train." I explained that breakfast starts at 7 for everyone. He asked if they could pay extra to eat earlier. I said no, the kitchen is not open before 7. He paused, then said, "So, there is no way to get breakfast before 7. I confirmed. He shook his head and said, "That is so rigid." Then he asked if there was a McDonald's nearby that opens earlier. There was not. He seemed personally offended by the entire concept of fixed breakfast hours. A tour guide in Barcelona told me about a group she was leading. They were walking through a narrow street in the Gothic quarter. She stopped to explain the history of a building. An American woman in the group interrupted and said, "Can we speed this up? We want to see the beach." The guide explained that the tour was 3 hours and covered specific landmarks. The woman said, "Yeah, but we have plans after this." The guide asked what time their plans were. The woman said, "Like 2 o'clock." It was 10 in the morning. The tour ended at 1. The guide explained this. The woman still seemed annoyed and kept checking her phone the whole time. My cousin worked at a train station in Switzerland. An American asked him for a ticket to Zurich. My cousin gave him the ticket. and told him the train leaves from platform 4 in 20 minutes. The guy asked, "Can I get on now?" My cousin said no, the train is not there yet. The guy said, "But I want to get a good seat." My cousin explained that the train has assigned seating. The guy asked where his seat number was. My cousin pointed to the number on the ticket. The guy read it, nodded, and then asked, "So I can just get on early and sit anywhere until someone asks me to move, right?" My cousin said no, you sit in your assigned seat when you board. The guy looked frustrated and said, "That seems complicated." I was at a cafe in Brussels. Small place, maybe 6 tables. You order at the counter and they bring the food to you. An American couple walked in, sat down, and started looking around. After a few minutes, the man waved at me and said, "Excuse me, can we get some menus?" I pointed to the menu board on the wall behind the counter. He squinted at it and said, "Do you have a paper menu?" I said, "No, just the board." He sighed and said, "How are we supposed to see all the options from here?" I suggested he come to the counter. He did, read the board, and then asked if someone could take his order at the table. I said, "No, you order here." He ordered, went back to his table and said to his wife, "This place has a weird system." A flight attendant told me about a passenger on a short flight from Dublin to Edinburgh. The flight was 45 minutes. The man asked for a full meal. She explained they only serve snacks on short flights. He said, "I paid for this ticket. I should get a meal." She explained that meals are only on long-haul flights. He asked how long the flight was. She said 45 minutes. He said, "That is almost an hour." She agreed. He said, "So that is long enough for a meal." She explained again that it was not how the airline worked. He asked to speak to someone. She said she was the senior attendant on this flight. He sat back, clearly annoyed, and did not say anything else. But when they landed, he left a complaint card on his seat. I worked at a grocery store in Copenhagen. An American asked me where the bags were. I pointed to the reusable bags you can buy near the register. He said, "No, the free plastic bags." I explained we do not give out free plastic bags. He asked why. I said it is store policy and also environmental law. He said, "So I have to buy a bag to carry the groceries I just bought?" I said yes, or bring your own. He stared at me like I was making it up. Then he asked if he could just carry everything in his hands. I said sure. He bought 6 items and tried to carry them all without a bag. He dropped one in the parking lot. I watched from the window. He picked it up, looked back at the store, and shook his head. A bartender in Prague told me about a customer who ordered a beer and then asked for tap water. The bartender explained they do not serve free tap water. The guy said, "What do you mean?" The bartender said, "You can buy bottled water." The guy said, "I just want water." The bartender repeated that bottled water is available for purchase. The guy said, "In America, water is free." The bartender said, "This is Prague." The guy sat there, visibly annoyed, and did not order water. He finished his beer and left. The bartender said it happens at least once a week. My friend worked at a museum in Rome. An American asked if they had a fast pass option. She said no. He asked if he could pay extra to skip the line. She said no. He asked if there was any way to get in faster. She said no, everyone waits the same amount. He said, "Even if I pay more?" She said yes. He looked around like he was expecting someone else to confirm this. Then he joined the line, but he kept looking at his watch the whole time. When he finally got inside, he spent 10 minutes in the museum and left. She saw him walk past the line on his way out and shake his head. I was working at a gas station in the Netherlands. An American pulled up and asked how much gas cost per gallon. I told him we sell it per liter. He asked how many liters are in a gallon. I said about 3.8. He paused, did some math in his head, and then said, "So that is like $15 a gallon?" I said, "If you convert it, yes, around that." He looked horrified. He asked if there was a cheaper station nearby. I said no, prices are similar everywhere. He filled up halfway and said, "I cannot afford to drive here." A cashier in Sweden told me about a customer who wanted to know the temperature outside. She said it was 18 degrees. He said, 18? That is freezing. She said, no, it is quite warm. He looked confused. She realized he thought she meant Fahrenheit. She explained it was Celsius. He asked what that was in Fahrenheit. She did not know off the top of her head. He pulled out his phone, converted it, and said, "Oh, 64. Why didn't you just say that?" She said, "Because we use Celsius." He nodded, but still seemed annoyed that he had to do the conversion himself. I worked at a hardware store in Germany. An American asked for a quarter-inch drill bit. I asked if he meant 6 millimeters. He said, "No, quarter-inch." I explained that we measure in millimeters here. He said, "Okay, so what is that in millimeters?" I told him about 635. He said, "Do you have that exact size?" I showed him a 6mm and a 7mm bit. He asked which one was closer. I said the 6mm. He bought it, but said, "This is going to mess up my measurements." My friend worked at a pharmacy in France. An American asked for a thermometer. She gave him one. He looked at it and said, "This only shows Celsius." She said yes. He asked if they had Fahrenheit thermometers. She said no. He said, "How am I supposed to know if I have a fever?" She explained that 37 degrees Celsius is normal body temperature. He said, "That does not help me." She suggested he search online for a conversion chart. He bought the thermometer but said, "This is ridiculous." A car rental worker in Spain told me about a customer who was shocked that the speed limit signs were in kilometers. He asked if there was a way to change them to miles. The worker said no. Signs are the same for everyone. The guy said, "So how do I know how fast I am going?" The worker pointed to the speedometer in the car, which showed both kilometers and miles. The guy looked relieved, but then asked, "Why do they not just use miles like normal?" The worker did not answer. I was at a bakery in Belgium. An American ordered a sandwich and asked how much it weighed. I said about 150 grams. He said, "How much is that in ounces?" I said roughly 5 ounces. He said, "That is it?" I said yes. He said, "That seems small." I told him it is a normal size here. He ordered 2 and said, "In America, sandwiches are way bigger." A hotel worker in Portugal told me about a guest who asked for the thermostat to be set to 72 degrees. The worker adjusted it and left. 10 minutes later, the guest called and said the room was way too hot. The worker came back and realized the guest meant Fahrenheit. The thermostat was in Celsius. It was set to 72 degrees, which is about 162 degrees. The worker fixed it immediately. The guest said, "You guys should really label that." My cousin worked at a doctor's office in Austria. An American patient came in and said he was 6 feet tall and 200 pounds. The nurse asked him to step on the scale. It showed 90 kilograms. He looked at the screen and said, "That is wrong." The nurse explained it was in kilograms. He said, "Can you change it to pounds?" She said no. He asked how much 90 kilograms was in pounds. She told him about 198. He said, "So basically the same." She said yes. He still seemed bothered that the scale did not show pounds. I worked at a clothing store in Denmark. An American woman asked for a size 8 dress. I asked if she meant European size 38. She said, "No, size 8. I explained that we use European sizing. She said, "What is that in American sizes?" I showed her a conversion chart. She looked at it and said, "This is confusing." She tried on 3 dresses and did not buy any. On her way out, she said, "You should just use normal sizes." A waiter in Greece told me about a customer who asked how far the beach was. The waiter said about 2 kilometers. The guy said, "How far is that in miles?" The waiter said roughly 1.2 miles. The guy said, "Why not just say a mile?" The waiter said, "Because we use kilometers." The guy said, "That is inconvenient." Then he asked for directions and walked there. It took him 20 minutes. When he came back, he said, "That felt longer than a mile." I was at a train station in Italy. An American asked what time the train arrived. I said 14:30. He said, "What time is that?" I said 2:30 in the afternoon. He said, "Why not just say that?" I explained that we use 24-hour time. He said, "That is so confusing." I told him the time again. He wrote it down as 2:30 and asked, "So I just need to be here at 2:30, right?" I said yes. He left, but I could see him double-checking his phone to make sure he understood. I was a tour guide in Edinburgh. An American asked me how close we were to London. I said about 400 miles. He said, "So we can drive there after this?" I said it would take 7 hours. He looked shocked. He said, "I thought the UK was small." I explained it is smaller than the US, but still takes time to cross. He said, "We drove through 3 states yesterday in less time." I nodded. He still seemed disappointed. A museum worker in Amsterdam told me about a visitor who asked if they spoke Dutch in Holland. She said yes. He said, "Wait, Holland and the Netherlands are the same place?" She said Holland is a region in the Netherlands, but most people use the terms interchangeably. He said, "So what language do you speak?" She said Dutch. He said, "Not Netherlandish?" She said, "No, that is not a language." He nodded slowly like he was processing completely new information. I worked at a cafe in Dublin. An American asked me if we used euros or pounds. I said euros. He said, "I thought Ireland was part of the UK." I said, "No, the Republic of Ireland is independent." He said, "But you are on the same island." I said yes, but Northern Ireland is part of the UK, and the Republic is separate. He said, "That is confusing." I agreed it can be. He paid in euros, but still seemed unsure if he was in the right country. A receptionist in Bruges told me about a guest who asked if Belgium was in France. She said no, Belgium is its own country. He said, "But you speak French here, right?" She said some people do, but Bruges is in the Flemish region where people speak Dutch. He said, "Wait, Dutch is spoken in Belgium too?" She said yes. He said, "I thought Dutch was only in the Netherlands." She explained that language and country borders do not always match. He nodded but looked completely lost. I was working at a bookstore in Prague. An American asked if we had books in Czechoslovakian. I said, "You mean Czech or Slovak?" He said, "Is that not the same thing?" I explained that Czechoslovakia split into 2 countries in 1993. He said, "When did that happen?" I repeated 1993. He said, "I had no idea." Then he asked if Prague was in the Czech Republic or Slovakia. I said Czech Republic. He bought a map. A bartender in Lisbon told me about a customer who was surprised people spoke Portuguese in Portugal. He said, "I thought you guys spoke Spanish." The bartender said no, Portuguese. The guy said, "Is that like a dialect of Spanish?" The bartender said no, it is a completely different language. The guy said, "They sound similar though." The bartender said, "Sure, but they are not the same." The guy nodded and then ordered in Spanish anyway. The bartender answered in Portuguese. My friend worked at a train station in Zurich. An American asked if Swiss was a language. She said no, Switzerland has 4 official languages: German, French, Italian, and Romansh. He said, "So what do you speak?" She said, "I speak German." He said, "But you are Swiss." She said, "Yes. Swiss people speak different languages depending on the region." He said, "That is confusing." She agreed. He bought his ticket and left, still looking puzzled. I was at a tourist information desk in Vienna. An American asked me what country Vienna was in. I said Austria. He said, "Oh, like with the kangaroos?" I said, "No, that is Australia." He laughed and said, "Right, yeah, I always mix those up." Then he asked if we spoke German or Austrian. I said German. He said, "So Austria and Germany speak the same language?" I said yes, with some dialect differences. He said, "Why are they separate countries then?" I explained they have different histories and governments. He said, "Huh, interesting," and walked away. A waiter in Barcelona told me about a customer who asked if people in Spain spoke Mexican. The waiter said, "You mean Spanish?" The guy said, "Yeah, same thing, right?" The waiter explained that Spanish is the language, and Mexican is a nationality. The guy said, "But they speak Spanish in Mexico." The waiter said yes, because Spain colonized it. The guy said, "Oh, so Spanish came first?" The waiter said yes. The guy said, "I did not know that." He ordered in English. I worked at a hotel in Stockholm. An American guest asked if Sweden was socialist. I said it is a social democracy, but not socialist in the strict sense. He said, "What is the difference?" I explained that Sweden has a market economy with strong welfare programs. He said, "So you pay a lot of taxes?" I said, "Yes, taxes are higher here." He said, "And you are okay with that?" I said, "Most people are." He said, "That would never work in America." I did not argue. He checked out 2 days later and left a review saying the hotel was nice but expensive. A tour guide in Athens told me about a visitor who asked if Greek people still believed in Zeus. The guide said no. Greece is predominantly Christian now. The guy said, "So nobody believes in the old gods?" The guide said it is ancient mythology, not a current religion. The guy seemed disappointed. He said, "That is too bad. It would be cool." The guide agreed it would be interesting, but explained that religions change over time. The guy nodded and took a picture of the Parthenon. I was at a bus station in Brussels. An American asked if people in Belgium spoke Belgian. I said, "No, we have Dutch, French, and German." He said, "So there is no Belgian language?" I said, "Correct." He said, "That is weird." I asked why. He said, "Because it is called Belgium." I explained that country names do not always match language names. He said, "In America, we speak American." I did not correct him. He bought his ticket and left. I was at a grocery store in Oslo. An American was trying to buy beer on a Sunday. The cashier told him they cannot sell alcohol on Sundays. He said, "Why not?" She said, "It is the law." He said, "That is ridiculous." She shrugged. He asked if there was another store that could sell it. She said no. Nowhere in Norway sells alcohol on Sundays except bars and restaurants. He said, "What if I really need it?" She said, "You have to buy it on Saturday." He stood there holding the beer like he was waiting for her to change her mind. She did not. He put it back and left. I heard him say to someone outside, "This country has weird rules." That is the thing about these stories. They are not about people being wrong or ignorant. They are about expectations. Americans grow up in a country where convenience is everywhere. Want food at midnight? There is a place open. Need something on a Sunday? No problem. Want to skip a line? Just ask nicely or pay extra. That is the system they know. So when they travel somewhere that does not work that way, it feels broken, not different. Broken. And the frustration is real. Imagine going somewhere and suddenly all the invisible rules you have followed your whole life do not apply. You do not know when to tip or how much. You do not know if you should take your shoes off indoors. You do not know if the train seat is assigned or first come. You do not know if you need exact change or if they will break a 50. Everything that felt automatic at home now requires a decision. And every decision feels like a test you did not study for. But here is the thing. People in other countries are not trying to make life difficult. They are just living the way they always have. And most of them are patient when visitors do not understand. They explain, they point, they help. But when someone argues that their way is better, or acts like local customs are inconvenient on purpose, that is when things get awkward. I think the best travelers are the ones who assume they are the ones who do not understand, not the other way around. They ask questions. They watch what others do. They laugh at their own mistakes instead of blaming the system. And honestly, that makes travel better for everyone, because the world is full of different systems, different languages, different rules, and none of them are wrong. They are just different. And if you can accept that, travel becomes a lot easier and a lot funnier. Because these moments are funny, not in a mean way, in a human way. We all mess up when we are somewhere new. The key is being okay with it, and trust me, these stories never stop coming. Every day, someone walks into a cafe or a train station or a museum and does something that makes a local stop and think, wait, do they really not know? And the answer is usually no, they really do not. And that is okay. That is part of traveling. That is part of learning. That is part of being human in a world that is bigger and stranger and more complicated than any of us realize until we step outside.